We all have a place we call home, a sanctuary, a fortress against the chaos of the outside world. It's the place where we lock the doors, draw the curtains, and breathe a sigh of relief. We believe we are safe within these four walls. We trust the familiar creaks of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet rhythm of our own space. This feeling of security is something we build our lives upon. It's a fundamental human need, a psychological anchor that keeps us grounded in a world that often feels unpredictable and overwhelming. We invest so much in this idea, telling ourselves that monsters don't exist, that the things that go bump in the night are just the house settling. But what if that feeling is just an illusion? What if the very walls we trust to protect us are porous, allowing something sinister to seep through? The truth is, safety is a fragile concept, a delicate veneer painted over a much darker reality. We convince ourselves that horror is something that happens elsewhere, to other people, in distant, shadowy places. We watch scary movies and read frightening books from the comfort of our couches, secure in the knowledge that the terror is contained within the screen or the page. We never imagine that the same darkness could find its way to our doorstep, to our quiet, unassuming street. Consider the familiar sounds of your own neighborhood at night. The distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the low rumble of a passing car. These are the sounds of normalcy, the ambient soundtrack to our peaceful lives. We rarely stop to question them. We don't listen for the footsteps that don't belong, the whisper that's carried on the breeze, or the scratching sound at the window that isn't a tree branch. We are conditioned to dismiss the unsettling, to rationalize the unexplainable, because to do otherwise would be to admit that we are not as safe as we believe. The stories you are about to hear are a stark reminder of this unsettling truth. They are about ordinary people, living in ordinary places, who discovered that the barrier between their world and a world of inexplicable terror was far thinner than they ever imagined. These are not tales from ancient castles or forgotten forests. They are stories born from the familiar landscapes of our own lives, the quiet suburban home, the modern apartment complex, the house at the end of the street. They serve as a chilling warning that sometimes the most terrifying things are not out there in the darkness, but right here, waiting just outside our window. Horror, we are often told, resides in the unknown and the extraordinary. We look for it in places that are already steeped in legend and fear: crumbling Gothic mansions, mist-shrouded graveyards, desolate stretches of forgotten highway. We expect monsters to have fangs and claws, to be creatures of folklore and myth. The human mind is adept at compartmentalizing fear, assigning it to specific locations and circumstances that we can choose to avoid. We tell ourselves that if we stay away from the haunted house, if we don't venture into the dark woods, we will be fine. We create rules to keep the darkness at bay, a set of self-imposed guidelines for survival. This is a comforting lie. The most potent and disturbing horror is not the kind that announces its presence with thunder and lightning. It's the kind that creeps in quietly, unnoticed, camouflaging itself within the mundane. It hides in the empty apartment upstairs, the one you were told was vacant. It lurks in the shadows of your own backyard, a space you've crossed 1,000 times without a second thought. It waits behind a broken panel in your fence, a minor detail you might dismiss as insignificant. The true terror is discovering that the ordinary world is not as solid or as safe as it appears. Think about the places you inhabit every day. Your bedroom, your kitchen, the hallway you walk down to get a glass of water in the middle of the night. These spaces are extensions of yourself, filled with your memories, your routines, your life. Now imagine that sense of familiarity being corrupted. Imagine a shadow in the corner of your eye that moves when it shouldn't. Imagine a voice whispering your name when you know you are alone. This is where true horror breeds, in the violation of the safe and the known, turning your personal sanctuary into a cage. The 5 stories that follow explore this very concept. They peel back the curtain of normalcy. The 5 stories that follow explore this very concept. They peel back the curtain of normalcy to reveal the unsettling presences that can attach themselves to people and places, regardless of how safe they seem. These are not stories of distant monsters in faraway lands. They are about the subtle, creeping dread that begins when you realize you are being watched by something that doesn't belong, something that operates by rules you don't understand. It's the horror that finds you not because you went looking for it, but simply because you were there, living your life, completely unaware of the darkness hiding in plain sight. When faced with the unexplainable, the human mind scrambles for a rational explanation. It's a defense mechanism, a way to maintain our sanity and our perception of a logical, ordered world. That strange noise from the attic? It must be the pipes. The figure you saw in the periphery? Just a trick of the light. The feeling of being watched? Simple paranoia, brought on by stress or a lack of sleep. We tell ourselves these stories to soothe our primal fears, to push back against the terrifying possibility that we are not in control, that there are forces at play beyond our comprehension. We build a narrative of logic to shield ourselves from the chaos. To shield ourselves from the chaos. This instinct for rationalization is a central theme in the experiences you are about to read. Each protagonist, when first confronted with something deeply wrong, tries to reason it away. An abandoned house is just an old, creaky building. A figure in the yard is just a neighbor, or perhaps an animal. The footsteps from the apartment above must be from a new tenant the landlord forgot to mention. They cling to these explanations desperately because the alternative is too horrifying to contemplate. They want to believe they are living in a world that makes sense, a world where such things do not happen. But what happens when the rationalizations begin to crumble? What happens when the evidence becomes irrefutable, when the strange occurrences escalate from subtle whispers to undeniable, physical manifestations of terror? This is the breaking point where the stories we tell ourselves are no longer enough to keep the darkness at bay. The fear becomes real, tangible, and inescapable. The line between paranoia and reality blurs, and the protagonists are forced to confront a truth they have been trying so hard to deny. They are not alone, and whatever is with them is not friendly. Prepare yourself, because these 5 urban horror stories will challenge your own sense of security. They will make you question the noises in your own home, the shadows in your own yard, and the silence from the empty apartment next door. They are designed to linger, to creep into your thoughts long after you've finished reading. They are a potent reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not the ones we read, but the ones that could be happening right now, to someone just like you, in a place just like yours. You may want to leave a light on tonight. I've never been what you would call a risk taker. My life has always been governed by a healthy respect for rules and a general desire to avoid unnecessary trouble. I was the friend who always suggested we go home before curfew, the one who saw the potential consequences in every reckless idea. But curiosity, as they say, has a powerful and often dangerous pull. It was a cool Friday evening, the final moments of sunlight painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, when my friends issued the dare. The target was the old house at the very end of our street, a dilapidated structure that everyone in the neighborhood referred to as the Hollow House. The name was fitting. It looked like a hollowed-out skeleton of a home, its soul long since departed. The house had been abandoned for as long as I could remember, a silent, decaying monument to a forgotten past. Its windows were either boarded up with splintered planks of wood or shattered, leaving jagged, gaping mouths that seemed to stare out at the world with a vacant expression. From the sidewalk, I could see the floral wallpaper peeling away from the walls in long, curling strips, revealing the dark, rotting wood beneath. It was painfully obvious that no one had set foot inside for decades, at least no one who intended to stay. The dare was simple: go inside, spend 10 minutes, and come back out. Simple, yet my stomach was already churning with a mixture of dread and a foolish sense of pride. With my backpack strapped tightly across my chest, I found myself hesitating at the edge of the overgrown lawn. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the world was plunged into the deep blue of twilight. "It's just an old house," I muttered to myself, the words feeling hollow and unconvincing even to my own ears. Each step I took toward the front porch felt heavier than the last, as if the very air around the property was thick with resistance. It was then that I felt the first real prickle of fear. Not the kind you get from a scary movie, but a deep, primal instinct that crawls up your spine and makes every hair on your body stand on end. The front door, surprisingly, wasn't locked. Of course, it wasn't. Why would anyone bother to lock a place that was already so broken? It groaned in protest as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous space within like a pained moan. The smell hit me immediately, a potent and nauseating cocktail of mildew, damp earth, and decay. But there was something else underneath it all, a faint, metallic tang that reminded me of old pennies or dried blood. I forced myself to ignore it, to push past the threshold, my sneakers crunching loudly on a carpet of broken glass and debris. The interior was much darker than I had anticipated, a void where shadows stretched and writhed like living things. Once inside, I pulled out the small flashlight I had brought, its beam cutting a nervous, trembling path through the oppressive darkness. The light revealed a scene of utter dereliction. Old furniture, draped in thick, gray sheets of dust, and elaborate cobwebs, stood like ghostly sentinels in the gloom. The tattered remains of once elegant curtains swayed gently in the drafts that snaked through the shattered window panes, their movement creating eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. Every floorboard groaned and protested under my weight, each sound magnified by the profound silence of the house. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a place that did not want me there, and every creak seemed to announce my presence to whatever lingered in the darkness. I began to explore the downstairs rooms one by one, my heart hammering against my ribs with a frantic rhythm. The living room, the dining room, the kitchen, they were all in a similar state of decay, frozen in a moment of forgotten time. It was in the dining room that I first noticed the graffiti. Names, dates, and strange esoteric symbols were etched and spray-painted across the peeling walls. Most of them were faded, the work of other teenagers who had likely taken the same dare over the years. But one name, in particular, seemed to appear with obsessive frequency. Elena. It was scrawled everywhere, sometimes in neat cursive, other times in a frantic, angry script. Often, it was crossed out, or circled, as if it held some special, dark significance. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was probably just the signature of a local kid who wanted to leave their mark. I continued my cautious exploration, trying to keep my mind focused on the 10-minute time limit, but then I heard the first sound that wasn't made by me or the groaning house. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was unmistakable, whispering. I froze mid-step, my entire body tensing up. The air around me suddenly felt heavier, thick, and suffocating, as if it were pressing in on me from all sides. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the whispers ceased the moment I focused on them, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. I tried to dismiss it as the wind, or my imagination playing tricks on me in the high-stress environment. I took another tentative step, and that's when I heard it again, clearer this time. Footsteps. They were faint, echoing from somewhere on the floor directly above me. They were light, almost hesitant, but they were definitely there. My blood ran cold. I was supposed to be alone in this house. The rational part of my brain screamed that another group of kids must have come in after me, but the fear that gripped me knew better. The footsteps above were not the clumsy, loud sounds of teenagers. They were quiet, deliberate, and they were tracking my movements from the second floor. A toxic blend of paralyzing fear and reckless curiosity warred within me. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around, to bolt out the front door and never look back. But another, more foolish part of me needed to know what was making those sounds. It needed to understand what was happening in this house. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way to the grand, sweeping staircase that dominated the entryway. Each wooden step moaned loudly under my foot, a series of drawn-out groans that felt like a betrayal, announcing my ascent to whatever waited for me on the second floor. My hand trembled on the dusty banister as I climbed, my flashlight beam dancing erratically across the decaying walls. The landing at the top of the stairs was shrouded in an even deeper darkness. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight like tiny, spectral insects. There were several closed doors leading off the landing, but one, at the far end of the hall, was slightly ajar. A faint, almost imperceptible light seemed to spill from the crack, a soft, pulsating glow that was different from the moonlight outside. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn toward it. As I approached, the air grew colder, and that strange metallic smell from downstairs was replaced by something else, the acrid, sickening scent of burnt hair. My stomach lurched, but I pushed the door open the rest of the way. The room was small, perhaps a child's bedroom once. The source of the light was a mystery, as it seemed to emanate from the very air itself, casting a dim, sickly pallor over everything. In the center of the room, lying on the floor as if it had been dropped in a hurry, was a diary. It was old, its leather cover warped and stained by water damage. I knelt, my flashlight beam falling across the open pages. They were filled with frantic, almost illegible handwriting, the ink smeared in places as if by tears or rain. The diary belonged to a woman named Elena, the same name I had seen scrawled all over the walls downstairs. The entries began normally enough. Elena wrote about moving into the house alone, full of hope and plans to restore it to its former glory. She described the quiet neighborhood and the simple joys of fixing up her new home. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted dramatically. The entries became shorter, more panicked. She wrote about hearing noises at night, of seeing figures standing in the corners of her vision, of doors opening and closing on their own. The final entry, on the very last page, was a barely coherent scrawl, the pen having dug deep into the paper. "They are inside. They know I'm here. Don't let them take me." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room shot through my body as I read those final words. The diary felt heavy in my hands, a testament to a terror I was only just beginning to comprehend. That's when I heard it again, no longer faint or distant. It was a whisper, a single sibilant word breathed directly into my ear, so close I could almost feel the cold breath on my skin. "Go," it hissed. I spun around with a strangled cry, my flashlight beam cutting a wild, desperate arc through the empty room. There was no one there. The air was still, the shadows were empty, but the presence was undeniable. My breathing became heavy, and a wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over me. Something kept me rooted to the spot for a moment longer. It was a morbid fascination, a horrifying need to see what this place truly held. I backed slowly toward the doorway, my eyes darting into every dark corner, expecting something to lunge out at me. And that's when I saw the shadows move. They weren't behaving like normal shadows, which simply lie flat and still. These shadows twisted and writhed with an unnatural life of their own. They pulled away from the corners of the room, stretching and bending like black, viscous liquid. They formed impossible shapes, elongating and contracting as if the very walls of the house were alive and breathing around me. My survival instincts finally kicked in, overriding the paralysis of fear. I ran. I didn't just walk or jog, I fled, stumbling blindly down the hallway and back toward the staircase. I tripped over some unseen debris, my flashlight clattering from my grasp and rolling away into the darkness, leaving me in near total blackness. I scrambled down the stairs on my hands and knees, the splintered wood digging into my palms, my only guide the faint moonlight filtering through the front door. Every shadow seemed to reach for me, every creak of the house sounded like a pursuing footstep. I had never known a terror so complete, so absolute. When I finally reached the bottom of the stairs and scrambled to the front door, I hesitated for a single, fatal second to catch my breath. It was in that moment that I saw it. A figure was standing just outside the open doorway, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. It was not a person. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at angles that were fundamentally wrong and physically impossible for a human skeleton. Its head was tilted, and its face was a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless expanse. It didn't move, but I could feel its awareness, its malevolent attention fixed entirely on me. It was watching, it was waiting, and I knew with chilling certainty that it had been waiting for me all along. I have always prided myself on living in what most people would describe as a perfectly safe neighborhood. The streets are quiet and lined with neatly manicured lawns. The neighbors are friendly enough to offer a polite nod, and, honestly, the most exciting event is usually a dog barking at a squirrel. Safety, I've come to learn, is not a guarantee. It is an illusion, a comforting story we tell ourselves to keep the darkness at bay. I learned this lesson the hard way, one oppressively warm summer night, a night that shattered my perception of security and replaced it with a fear that still lingers in the deepest corners of my mind. It began with the simple, mundane act of ending my day. The evening had been unremarkable. I was sitting on my back porch, the screen door propped open to let in the cool night air. I scrolled aimlessly through my phone, enjoying the symphony of crickets and the peaceful stillness that had settled over the world. A distant car engine was the only sound that broke the silence. Around 11 o'clock, I decided to call it a night. I performed my nightly ritual, locking the back door, double-checking that all the windows were securely fastened, and giving my dog, Rusty, a final pat before heading to bed. I felt secure, cocooned within the familiar walls of my home, completely oblivious to the terror that was about to unfold. An hour or so later, a sound jolted me from the edge of sleep. It wasn't a loud or alarming noise, but a subtle, insidious creak that seemed to originate from the backyard. My first thought, a rational one, was that it was just the wind rattling a loose fence panel, or perhaps a tree branch scraping against the side of the house. I tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as one of the many innocuous sounds a house makes at night. But then I heard it again, more distinct this time. It was a soft thump, the unmistakable sound of a weight settling on the grass, like someone taking a light, careful step. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, sleepy rhythm, began to race. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my feet making no sound on the carpeted floor. Rusty, who usually stirred at the slightest movement, remained sound asleep at the foot of my bed, a fact that I found strangely unsettling. I crept over to my bedroom window and cautiously peeked through a gap in the blinds. The backyard was cloaked in darkness, with only the faint glow of a distant street lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then, my eyes adjusted, and I detected movement near the old wooden shed at the far end of the property. I squinted, trying to make sense of the shape, my mind desperately trying to find a logical explanation. My mind immediately began cycling through rational possibilities for the movement I had seen. It had to be a raccoon, I told myself, or maybe the neighbor's notoriously adventurous cat out on a nightly prowl. These were familiar, non-threatening explanations that could easily account for a fleeting shape in the shadows. I held on to these thoughts, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. But the silence that followed was too profound, too heavy. There was no rustling, no animalistic scurrying. There was only a deep, watchful stillness that felt entirely unnatural. Then, a figure stepped out from behind the shed, and every one of my rationalizations evaporated into a cold, hard knot of fear. It was human-shaped, tall and slender, but it moved with a bizarre, jerky quality that sent a shiver down my spine. Its limbs seemed to twitch and stutter, as if it were a marionette being controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. It didn't walk like a person. It lurched, its movements disjointed and wrong. I froze completely, my body pressed against the cool glass of the window. My phone was still clutched in my hand, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button, but I was paralyzed, trapped in a state of horrified fascination. The figure made no sound as it stood there, its form a stark, black silhouette against the deep blue of the night. It just stood there, perfectly still, its attention fixed on my house. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, its head tilted to one side at an angle that seemed physically impossible, a sharp, grotesque crack echoing in the silence of my mind. The faint moonlight glinted off its face, but I couldn't discern any features. I couldn't tell if it had eyes, but I felt them on me. I felt its gaze pierce through the window, through the walls, and into the very core of my being. There was something profoundly inhuman about its presence, an aura of malevolence that was as palpable as the cold sweat beading on my forehead. After what felt like a lifetime of it just standing there, studying my home, it began to move closer. It advanced with a slow, deliberate pace, each step measured and purposeful, as if it were testing the ground, or perhaps testing my resolve. I remained hidden, my breath caught in my throat, praying it couldn't see me. My thoughts immediately went to Rusty, still sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the danger that was now just feet from our door. If this person or this thing found a way inside, we would be trapped. The comforting walls of my home no longer felt like a fortress. They felt like a flimsy, transparent cage. My hand trembled uncontrollably as I fumbled for the flashlight on my nightstand. I didn't know what I hoped to accomplish. Maybe I thought the light would scare it away. Or maybe I just needed to see it clearly, to confirm that my mind wasn't fabricating this nightmare from shadows and fear. With a surge of desperate courage, I pointed the flashlight toward the backyard and flicked it on. The powerful beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the figure for a brief, horrifying second. The sight that greeted me was far worse than anything my imagination could have conjured. Its limbs were not just long, they were grotesquely elongated and thin, disproportionate to its body, and they bent at sharp, unnatural angles that defied all laws of anatomy. Its face, I struggled to find the words to describe it even now. It was pale, a stark, bone-white canvas that was utterly devoid of expression or features. There was no mouth, no nose, just a smooth, blank expanse of skin. And yet, despite the absence of eyes, I knew it was looking directly at me. It felt alive, hideously so, its featureless face somehow conveying a sense of cold, calculating intelligence. The instant the light hit it, the figure recoiled, but not like a person would. It seemed to fold in on itself, collapsing into the shadows with a speed that was impossible, inhuman. I blinked, and it was gone. The backyard was empty again, silent save for the quiet rustle of leaves and the gentle night wind. My breathing returned in shaky, ragged bursts. I stood there for a long time scanning the yard, my flashlight beam dancing nervously over the empty space where it had stood. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the stress of the week had manifested as a waking nightmare. It was a comforting lie, but it didn't hold. The image of that thing, its bent limbs, its blank face, was seared into my memory. I knew what I had seen was real. Sleep was no longer an option. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, jumping at every creak of the house, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. Around 2 in the morning, as I sat rigidly in my bed, I heard it again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It was the sound of a faint, dry scratching right outside my bedroom window. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to look, my eyes slowly moving toward the glass. For a terrifying split second, I saw a reflection superimposed over my own. It was a pale, smooth face, its head tilted in that same sickening, unnatural way, staring directly at me from the other side of the pane. I let out a choked gasp and recoiled, scrambling away from the window as if I'd been burned. Panic took over. I grabbed a kitchen knife, hands shaking, and checked every lock and window, but the sense of being watched only grew heavier. Daylight brought little comfort. In the grass, I found impossibly long, narrow footprints leading to my bedroom window, then vanishing. The police found nothing. They suggested I get more sleep. I tried to move on, but 2 weeks later, it returned tall, thin, motionless by the shed, watching. I couldn't sleep or eat. I moved away, but the memory and the dread followed. Even now, I check my windows at night, certain it's still out there, waiting. My new apartment promised solitude, but I was never truly alone. On the 3rd night, I heard footsteps above me, deliberate, slow, impossible, since the unit was supposed to be vacant. I tried to rationalize it, but the footsteps continued, pacing in strange, relentless circles. One night, I crept into the hallway, listening. The footsteps grew clearer, right above my head. I whispered, "Hello? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, and somehow more terrifying. I realized then, something was sharing my space. I locked myself in, desperate for logic, but the next morning, sunlight revealed deep scratches gouged into my ceiling fresh, as if made overnight. Fear became my shadow. The footsteps returned, joined by a low, rhythmic humming. Sleep vanished. Every sound set my nerves on edge. One night, I found my door ajar, though I always locked it. Inside, nothing was disturbed except my bed sheets twisted, as if someone had been waiting. The sense of invasion was complete. I was no longer alone in my own home. Something was watching and waiting. That was it. I called the police, but they found nothing, no break-in, no evidence, just my growing terror. After that, things escalated. Shadows moved across my ceiling, sometimes forming a pale, thin hand pressing down from above. I slept with a knife under my pillow. One night, I woke to my lamp flickering, footsteps pounding above, the ceiling pulsing like a living thing. Then, a voice raspy, ancient whispered my name from within the walls, growing into a chant, "Sarah, Sarah." I fled toward the door, the voice following, insistent and demanding. My nightmare was no longer confined to dreams. I ran for the exit, but at the top of the stairs stood a figure, tall, thin, featureless, tall, thin, featureless, tall, thin, featureless, gliding silently down, its finger pointing at me. Terror pinned me in place until the gesture broke the spell. I stumbled, scrambled for the door, and slammed it shut behind me. I spent the night huddled in the living room, flashlight shaking, praying for dawn. When morning came, silence returned, but I knew it wasn't over. That figure would be back. I was no longer safe, not anywhere. Some things, once invited in, never truly leave. I've always thought of my neighborhood as the dictionary definition of safe. The streets are quiet, lined with identical houses and neatly trimmed lawns. Neighbors offer polite, distant nods as they collect their mail. In the summer, you hear the familiar sounds of kids riding their bikes and the occasional barking of a dog chasing squirrels. It's the kind of place you move to when you want peace, when you want to believe that the world's dangers are far away. That's why I felt so foolish, so utterly naive, when I first became aware of him or it. The night began just like any other, a quiet evening spent at home, scrolling through my phone on the couch while Max, my golden retriever, dozed peacefully at my feet. The first sign was so subtle, I almost missed it. It was a flicker of movement past my living room window, a fleeting shadow that I immediately dismissed as a trick of the passing streetlights or a cloud moving across the moon. But a few nights later, I saw it again. This time, it wasn't just a flicker. It was a distinct figure, standing at the far edge of my yard, just where the manicured grass met the darkness of the trees. It was tall, unnervingly thin, and completely still. It was too far away to make out any features, but the sheer stillness of its posture felt wrong, predatory. It was staring directly at my house. One night, my unease finally outweighed my fear. I had to get a better look. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked to the front window, pressing my face close to the cool glass. The figure was still there, in the exact same spot. It hadn't moved an inch. As I watched, its head tilted to one side at a sharp, unnatural angle, a movement that was both slow and jerky. It was as if it was studying me, dissecting my home with an unseen gaze. The shadows it cast seemed to writhe and twist on the lawn, elongating and contracting independently of any light source. I blinked, my eyes watering from staring so intently. And when I looked again, it was gone. The following night was worse. The feeling of being watched had intensified, a palpable pressure against my senses. Around 11, I was sitting on my enclosed porch, trying to read, when I heard footsteps. They weren't coming from the sidewalk or the neighboring yards, they were coming directly from my own lawn. The steps were slow and deliberate, circling the perimeter of my house. Max, who had been lying quietly beside me, suddenly shot up, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest as his fur stood on end. I froze, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. Then, a voice, a dry whisper carried on the wind, slithered through the screen, "Come out." I shook my head, trying to dislodge the whispered words from my ears. It had to be my imagination. It had to be. But the fear radiating from Max was undeniable. His growl was deep and serious, the kind he reserved for genuine threats, not passing cats or raccoons. That fear was contagious, seeping into my skin and settling like ice in my stomach. I quickly herded him inside, slamming and locking the porch door behind us. I went through the house, checking and rechecking every lock, drawing every curtain, trying to build a fortress against the encroaching dread. Every sound from outside, the rustle of leaves against the siding, the creak of the wooden fence in the wind, made my stomach clench tighter. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself I was overreacting. It was probably just a neighbor taking a late-night walk, their path obscured by the darkness. Or maybe it was a teenager playing a prank, trying to spook the new person on the block. But then came the scratching. It started at the back window, the one overlooking the darkest part of the yard. It was soft at first, so faint I thought I might be imagining it, but Max heard it too. He let out a low whine, his ears pinned back, his body trembling as he stared at the window. The sound grew louder, more insistent, like sharp claws being dragged methodically across the glass. My own attempts at rationalization were failing. I grabbed the heavy aluminum baseball bat I kept under the couch and tiptoed toward the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip. I peered through a crack in the blinds, my eyes scanning the dark, empty yard. It seemed deserted, but I could feel it. A presence. The same oppressive, watchful feeling from the nights before. I swear the shadows themselves were different, deeper, and more menacing than usual. A corner of the yard that should have been merely dark seemed to pulse with an inky blackness, as if the night itself were alive and breathing. Then, I saw it again. The figure materialized at the far edge of the lawn, just beyond the weak halo of the street lamp. It was the same pale, unnaturally thin form, standing perfectly still. Its head was tilted slightly, a gesture that now seemed like a knowing acknowledgement that I was watching. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice was trapped behind a wall of fear. I could only whisper the words into the suffocating silence of my kitchen. "Who are you?" The figure offered no response. It didn't move like a person, not with the subtle shifts of weight and balance. It was as if it were a statue, a horrifying monument to the terror it inspired. The next few nights descended into a living nightmare. I abandoned any pretense of normalcy. The porch remained locked, the blinds stayed shut. Sleep became fragmented, punctuated by the recurring sounds of scratching at the windows and the soft, guttural whispers that seemed to ride the night air, always repeating the same two words, "Come out. Come out. Come out." The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison, and I was its only terrified inmate. I started leaving lights on in every room, a futile attempt to ward off the encroaching darkness, but the shadows only seemed to grow deeper and more menacing in contrast. I became obsessed with security. I checked the locks on the doors and windows so frequently that the metallic click became a constant rhythm in my home. I even invested in a set of motion-activated security cameras, thinking that digital proof would validate my fears, that I could show someone the footage and they would believe me. For the first week, the cameras showed nothing but an empty yard. The recordings were silent and still, showing no wind, no animals, no intruders. Yet, every single night, Max would stand in the same spot, growling at the same corner of the yard, at the same empty shadows that the cameras refused to see. The campaign of terror was relentless. The figure began to vary its position, appearing and vanishing in different spots around the yard. It was no longer confined to the tree line. One night, it would be by the fence. The next, it would be standing near the mailbox. Sometimes, it seemed to appear impossibly close to the house, gliding along the foundation in a way that defied logic, as if it were one with the shadows themselves. And then, one night, the barrier was broken. I heard the whisper not from outside, but from within, It was coming from the end of the dark hallway. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, its beam shaking as I swept it down the length of the hall. My own shadow danced and twisted on the walls, a grotesque partner to my fear. The moment the light hit the end of the hallway, the whispering stopped. There was nothing there. The doors to every room were closed and locked. The main door was bolted. No one could have possibly gotten inside, but the feeling was undeniable. An oppressive, suffocating presence had breached my defenses. The air itself felt heavier, charged with a silent, malevolent energy. The Watcher was no longer just outside, it was in the house with me. The nights that followed became unbearable. Sleep was an impossibility, a distant memory of a safer time. Every time I dared to close my eyes, my mind would be flooded with the sounds, the incessant scratching, the insidious whispering, the faint phantom thumping of footsteps pacing just outside my bedroom door, and sometimes, terrifyingly, inside my own head, Max, my once brave companion, refused to sleep in his bed by the door. Instead, he would cram his large body into the small space under my desk, growling low in his throat at shadows that I couldn't see but could acutely feel. The fear was a constant, living thing in the house. One night, I reached a breaking point. I decided I couldn't live like this anymore, a prisoner in my own home. I had to confront it. Maybe if I faced whatever was out there, if I showed it I wasn't afraid, even though I was terrified, it would finally leave me alone. With the baseball bat in one hand and my brightest flashlight in the other, I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and coppery, like old blood. My hands trembled as I swept the powerful beam of the flashlight across the dark expanse of my yard. And there it was. It was standing perfectly still, not at the edge of the lawn this time, but in the very center, closer than it had ever been before. It was the same pale, impossibly thin creature. Its head was tilted in that familiar, disturbing way. In the direct glare of the flashlight, I could see that its limbs weren't just long, they were disjointed, bending at sharp, painful-looking angles that no human joint could ever achieve. The shadows it cast on the grass behind it were not static. They stretched and writhed like black, searching tentacles, separate from the thing that cast them. My voice shook as I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" There was no response, only a dead, profound silence that swallowed my words. Then, slowly, it began to move toward me. It wasn't walking or running. It was gliding, sliding across the grass with a silent, horrifying speed. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, a stop-motion horror brought to life. My skin crawled, and my mind screamed at me to run, to get back inside, but my feet felt as though they were bolted to the wooden planks of the porch. It was a confrontation I had initiated, and now I was trapped by it. The figure stopped abruptly, just beyond the flimsy railing of my porch. It was so close now that the flashlight beam fully illuminated its face, or, more accurately, its complete lack of one. The head was a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless expanse of skin like an unpainted mannequin. Yet, somehow, in that blankness, I could, feel an intense, malevolent focus. My throat went dry, and a strangled sob escaped my lips. I stumbled backward, my leg catching on a patio chair, sending me crashing to the floor. As I fell, a sound hissed from the creature, or maybe it was just the wind, or my own terrified mind, but the sharp, sibilant noise sent a fresh wave of ice-cold terror through my entire body. That was all it took. I scrambled back inside, slamming the heavy wooden door and fumbling with the deadbolt. I could hear it outside, the whisper of my name now clear and right against the door, accompanied by a dry, scraping sound as it moved along the porch steps. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I sat in the corner of my living room with Max huddled against me, the baseball bat across my lap and the flashlight beam pointed at the door, its light shaking with the tremor of my hands. I spent hours imagining every possible way the figure could get in, every shadow a potential entry point. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the windows, the sound stopped. The yard was empty. There were no footprints. No scratches on the porch, nothing. I began to document everything, writing down every encounter, every sound, every shadow in a frantic journal. It felt like the only sane thing to do. The figure's visits grew more frequent and more aggressive. In the mornings I would find long, thin scratches on the outside of my windows, as if claws had been dragged down the glass. The whispers became louder, more insistent, no longer just a plea to come out, but a demanding, guttural command. The line between outside and inside continued to blur. The figure began to appear in my peripheral vision inside the house, a flash of pale white in the hallway, a tall shadow in the dining room gone the instant I turned to look. The final straw came a few nights later. I woke to a soft, rhythmic tapping sound at my bedroom window. Max was growling uncontrollably beside me, a continuous, desperate warning. When I forced myself to look, the figure was there, its featureless face pressed against the glass, illuminated by the streetlight. Its limbs were twisted around the window frame in a way that made my stomach churn. I don't know why that was the moment, but something inside me snapped. I grabbed my keys and my dog and I ran. I left everything else behind and fled the house that night. I never went back. I moved far away, but sometimes, when the shadows in my new apartment twist just right, I swear I can still feel it, watching, waiting. And I know, without a doubt, that if I ever returned, it would be there for me, waiting in the dark. I had just moved into a small, unassuming house on the quiet outskirts of town. It felt like the perfect place to start fresh, a blank slate far from the noise and chaos of city life. The streets were peaceful, the neighbors seemed friendly enough from a distance, and the house came with a large backyard, a perfect grassy expanse for my dog, Scout, to run and play freely. I was convinced I had found my own little piece of suburban paradise. But I soon learned a harsh and terrifying lesson: a quiet street and a picket fence are no guarantee of safety. Sometimes the most serene places hide the deepest and most patient darkness. My ordeal began on the very first night, before all the boxes were even unpacked. I had spent the entire evening arranging furniture, hanging pictures, and trying to impose a sense of order on the chaos of moving. Around 11 o'clock, exhausted but satisfied, I decided to take Scout out for one last walk in the yard before we both turned in for the night. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was a blanket of stars. It was as I was clipping the leash onto Scout's collar that I saw it. One of the thick wooden panels along the side fence had been ripped away, leaving a jagged, dark gap in the perimeter of my new property. A knot of unease immediately twisted in my stomach. I was certain that the fence had been intact when I did my final walkthrough with the real estate agent just a few days prior. I had spent the entire day inside the house, doors locked, completely absorbed in my tasks. Someone or something must have deliberately tampered with the fence while I was inside, completely unaware. Scout, usually eager to explore, stood rigid beside me. She let out a low, rumbling growl, her ears pinned back and her eyes fixed on the dark opening, as if she could see or sense whatever had come through it. Her reaction amplified my own growing fear tenfold. My first impulse was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That a piece of my fence was broken? I could already imagine their dismissive tone. I convinced myself that it was probably just some neighborhood kids looking for a shortcut or a bit of harmless vandalism. It was a flimsy rationalization, but it was the only one I had. I led Scout back inside, securing the fence as best I could with a loose piece of timber I found in the garage. That night, I locked every door and window with meticulous care, but the feeling of violation lingered. The sanctity of my new home had been breached before I even had a chance to feel safe within it. The next night, the true nature of my predicament began to reveal itself. The unsettling feeling from the night before had not dissipated. Instead, it had settled into a low, humming anxiety that I couldn't shake. As darkness fell, the sounds began. They were soft at first, almost imperceptible. Faint footsteps, just on the edge of hearing, pacing back and forth along the outside of the fence, right where the broken panel was. A soft tap, 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 followed by a long, unnerving pause. Then came the scratching sound, a dry, deliberate scraping, like sharp fingernails being dragged slowly and methodically across the aging wood. Scout stood by the back door, her body tense, emitting a continuous low growl. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. The stress of the move, the unfamiliar sounds of a new house, my overactive imagination, these were the stories I desperately tried to believe. But the sounds were too rhythmic, too intentional to be the wind or a stray animal. The scratching continued, a maddening, persistent sound that grated on my nerves. The following night, things escalated. I was jolted from a light, fitful sleep by a soft but distinct thumping at the back door. My heart leaped into my throat. With shaking hands, I grabbed the heavy flashlight I'd started keeping on my nightstand and crept to the living room window that overlooked the yard. I shined the beam across the dark lawn, my hand trembling so much that the light danced erratically. And then, it found him, a figure. It was standing just beyond the broken section of the fence, partially obscured by shadow. It was pale, shockingly thin, and its limbs were bent at angles that were fundamentally wrong, physically impossible. Its head was tilted in a way that suggested a broken neck, a gesture of grotesque curiosity. I couldn't make out any facial features in the darkness, just a smooth, blank expanse where a face should be. It wasn't moving like a human being. It wasn't moving at all. It was just standing there, a silent sentinel, aware that I was watching, waiting. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. Scout, who had followed me into the room, didn't bark. Instead, she let out a pitiful whimper and crawled under my arm, seeking safety from the thing in the yard. The figure didn't approach the house right away. After a long, terrifying moment of stillness, it began to move. It didn't walk. It glided along the perimeter of the yard, a silent, fluid motion that was utterly soundless. It slid over the grass as if it were floating, its impossible form a moving patch of deeper darkness against the night. I stumbled backward from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs, the flashlight shaking uncontrollably in my hand. Over the next week, my new home transformed from a place of hope into, well, a prison of fear. The figure's nightly visits became a horrifying ritual. It always appeared in the yard, always near the broken fence, and it was always silent except for the occasional, chilling whisper that seemed to be carried on the wind, a single, bursest end of, browind, insidious phrase repeated over and over, come out. My sleep schedule was completely destroyed. I stopped leaving the house after sunset. The simple act of opening a window to let in the fresh air became, totally unthinkable. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my house, and even they didn't feel safe anymore. In a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, I invested in what I thought were foolproof security measures. I installed high-lumen, motion-activated floodlights around the entire property. I bought a set of wireless security cameras and placed them strategically to cover every angle of the yard, with a particular focus on the broken fence. I reinforced the flimsy patch job I had done with heavy-duty screws and another plank of wood. But none of it made any difference. The lights would flicker on and off at random, illuminating an empty yard. The cameras recorded hours of footage showing nothing but swaying trees and shifting shadows. And yet, the figure always returned. One night, around 2 a.m, I was woken by Scout growling more furiously than I had ever heard her before. The air in my bedroom felt heavy and thick, charged with an oppressive energy. I could hear the faint scratching sound again, but this time it wasn't at the fence, it was at my back door. Then, the whispering started. It was low and guttural, a horrifying, intimate sound that seemed to be coming from just on the other side of the glass. It was repeating my name over and over, a relentless, demanding chant, come out, come out. I forced myself out of bed, my legs feeling like lead. I grabbed the heavy kitchen knife I'd taken to keeping by my bed and crept to the window. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I peered through the blinds, and my stomach plummeted. The figure was no longer lingering by the fence. It had crossed into my yard, moving with an impossible speed, and was now standing directly outside my back door. Its long, thin limbs were twisted at angles that made my stomach churn. Its head was tilted, its featureless face staring straight at me through the glass, as if it could see me perfectly in the darkness. I flinched back from the window as if I'd been struck, slamming the blinds shut and fumbling to make sure the door was bolted. But the figure didn't try to get in. It didn't need to. Its purpose seemed to be psychological torture, a slow and methodical erosion of my sanity. It lingered just outside the door for what felt like hours, a terrifying, silent presence. The whispers continued their maddening chant until the first gray light of dawn began to streak the sky. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. It vanished as if it had never been there at all, leaving behind only the profound silence of the morning. The next day, I found the evidence. There were footprints in the morning dew. They were long, thin, and irregularly shaped, leading from the broken panel in the fence directly to my back door, where they simply stopped. There were no prints leading away. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches on the door, nothing tangible that I could show to an officer of the law. The figure was careful, patient, and it seemed to know exactly how to terrify me without leaving a shred of conventional proof. I called the police anyway, my voice cracking with desperation as I tried to explain. They checked the fence, noted the damage, but found nothing else. They left me with a pamphlet on neighborhood watch programs. The nightly siege continued, becoming my new, horrifying reality. Same time, same place, every single night. The figure would glide through my yard, bending the shadows around it as if they were living extensions of its own form. I stopped sleeping altogether. I stopped leaving the house, even during the day. I stopped opening my eyes after dark, afraid of what I might see in the reflections on the darkened windows. My world, once full of promise, had shrunk to the size of my bedroom, and Scout never left my side, her constant low growls a soundtrack to my terror. Finally, I broke. I couldn't take another night of it. I packed a single bag with my essentials, grabbed Scout, and fled in the middle of the night. I didn't look back. I drove for hours, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that house. The broken fence remained, a silent, gaping wound, and an invitation to whatever haunted that yard. Even now, years later and miles away, when I drive past a quiet suburban street at night, I feel the weight of its gaze on me. The whispers still haunt the edges of my mind, faint but persistent. Come out, come out. I don't know what it was, or why it chose me. I only know that it exists. It watches. It waits. And I know, with chilling certainty, that it never truly stops. We build our lives around the idea of safety. We choose quiet neighborhoods, install deadbolts on our doors, and draw the curtains at night to shut out the world. Our homes are meant to be our sanctuaries, the one place on earth where we can let our guard down and feel truly secure. It is a deeply ingrained belief, a cornerstone of our psychological well-being. We tell ourselves that the horrors we see in movies or read in books are confined to fiction, that monsters do not lurk in well-lit suburbs or modern apartment buildings. These 5 stories, however, serve as a chilling and potent testament to a much darker truth, that our sense of safety is a fragile illusion, easily shattered by the inexplicable. Each narrative begins in a place of perceived security. A familiar street, a quiet backyard, a new apartment full of promise. The protagonists, much like any of us, believed in the integrity of their walls and the predictable rhythm of their daily lives. They were not seeking out danger or looking for trouble in haunted places. The terror found them. It seeped through the cracks of their ordinary existence, a dare to enter an abandoned house. A strange sound from a vacant apartment. A strange sound from a vacant apartment. A broken fence panel that seemed like a minor inconvenience. These small, seemingly insignificant moments were the entry points for a horror that would dismantle their reality piece by piece. The true horror in these accounts is not just the presence of a malevolent entity, but the violation of the sanctuary itself. The home, once a symbol of comfort and protection, becomes the stage for a relentless psychological siege. The very sounds of the house, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of leaves outside the window, are twisted into something sinister and threatening. The familiar becomes alien. The safe becomes a cage. This transformation is the core of the terror. The realization that there is nowhere to run when the danger is not just outside your door, but has already found a way to get inside your head. These stories force us to confront an uncomfortable question: how safe are we, really? They suggest that the barriers we erect against the unknown are far more porous than we imagine. A locked door is no defense against a presence that can glide through walls or manifest in the shadows of your own hallway. A security camera is useless against a watcher that leaves no physical trace. The experiences of these individuals reveal that our most trusted defenses are often psychological, and once those defenses are breached, the feeling of safety may never fully return, leaving only a lingering, perpetual state of watchfulness. Across these 5 harrowing tales, a disturbing pattern emerges. A single terrifying figure appears again and again, a recurring nightmare that seems to transcend location and circumstance. It is described with an unsettling consistency: tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that bend at impossible angles. Its face is a smooth, pale, and featureless void, yet it conveys a chilling sense of awareness and intelligence. It does not move like a human. It glides, it lurches, it appears and disappears with a speed that defies physics. It is a silent predator, its presence announced only by whispers on the wind and a palpable sense of being watched. This entity does not operate with the brute force of a common monster. It does not smash down doors or roar in the night. Its methods are far more insidious, a form of psychological warfare designed to isolate and terrify its victims. It begins its assault from a distance, a watcher at the edge of a yard or a sound from an empty room. It slowly, methodically closes the distance, escalating its presence from a fleeting shadow to a figure pressed against the bedroom window. It learns its victims' routines, their fears, and it uses that knowledge to systematically dismantle their sanity. It is patient, relentless, and seemingly unstoppable. The motives of this creature remain a terrifying mystery. It doesn't seem to want to kill, at least not immediately. Its goal appears to be the terror itself. It whispers pleas and commands come out, as if it wants its victims to willingly step into the darkness with it, to surrender to the fear it inspires. It is a stalker in the purest sense, deriving some unknown satisfaction from the slow erosion of its target's will. This being is not a ghost tied to a single location. It is a predatory force that can attach itself to a person, following them from one home to the next, a parasitic horror that cannot be escaped by simply moving away. This shared antagonist connects these disparate stories into a larger, more horrifying narrative. It suggests that this thing is out there, active, and potentially anywhere. It could be the neighbor in the dark, the intruder in the backyard, or the presence that waits behind a broken fence. It exists in the periphery of our world, a predator hiding in plain sight, camouflaged by shadow and our own unwillingness to see what is right in front of us. It is a chilling reminder that the things we should be most afraid of are not always the ones that make the most noise. For the protagonists of these stories, the ordeal does not end when they flee. The physical danger may be left behind, but the psychological scars remain, deep and permanent. Moving to a new house or a new city provides only a temporary, fragile respite. The terror has been internalized, a phantom limb of fear that aches long after the source is gone. Every shadow seems to hold a familiar shape. Every whisper of the wind sounds like a name being called. Every creak of a floorboard is a potential footstep. They are left in a state of hypervigilance, forever checking locks, peering through blinds, and unable to find true peace even in the brightest daylight. The most terrifying aspect of these encounters is the unanswered question: is it truly over? The figure's ability to follow its victims, to reappear in new locations, suggests that escape may be impossible. It is a haunting without end, a malevolent attachment that defies distance and logic. The final lines of each story resonate with this chilling uncertainty. The feeling of being watched persists. The whispers echo in the memory. The knowledge that the creature is still out there, somewhere, patient and waiting, is a burden that must be carried for the rest of their lives. The horror is not just what happened, but the terrifying possibility that it could happen again at any moment. These urban legends serve as more than just frightening tales to be shared around a campfire or on the internet. They are modern fables that prey on our most fundamental anxieties about safety, isolation, and the unknown. They remind us that the world is not always the rational, orderly place we want it to be. There are things that exist in the spaces between what we can see and what we can explain, presences that operate by a set of rules we will never comprehend. The darkness, they warn, is not confined to abandoned houses or forgotten woods. It can be found in the most ordinary of places. So, the next time you are home alone at night and you hear an unfamiliar sound, pause and listen. When you see a flicker of movement in your peripheral vision, consider what it might be. The stories we tell ourselves to feel safe are powerful, but the stories you have just heard suggest a reality that is far more unsettling. The darkness is patient. It is always watching, and it is always waiting for an invitation, whether it's a broken fence, an unlocked door, or simply the belief that you are, and always will be, completely and utterly safe.